Okay, well, maybe we should talk about role-playing games.
I can talk about a card game real quick.
Oh, okay. You want to talk about a card game?
I want to talk about a card game.
What's it called? Why do you want to talk about it?
Lorcana.
All right, start over. What what role-playing game?
Lorcana.
So you want to talk about a card game?
Lorcana. It's the Disney CCG.
Oh, okay.
You are an Illumineer, and you use ink from your inkwell to summon glimmers of Disney characters and send them on quests for lore.
Wow.
And I bought a starter to teach my 8-year-old daughter how to play, and we played today, and her reading is there, and her turn priority senses are there, and we had a great time. And she's like, I want to play this with you every day. And I'm like, okay.
All right, cool.
And it's just really, it was really fun.
Yeah, I like that.
You can, the challenge mechanics really interesting, because you can't just, your goal is to send your characters on quests. So to use Magic terminology, you're like, I'm tapping this guy to send him on a quest.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a lore value, and he will get you that many lore points.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to slow somebody down, you can look at their tapped guys, and you can challenge them. And then you tap your guy, and then they fight, virtually the same as Magic. There's a power and defense rating. All that stuff. Except damage doesn't go away. It stays on the character. So yeah, I don't know. It was just quick, pretty easy basic mechanics, quick to play. And Lottie and I were pretty hesitant to attack each other's characters.
Yeah.
And my deck is Scar and Kronk. So.
Who's Kronk?
Cusco. Poison for Cusco. Cusco's poison. Squeak. Squeak, squeaker. Squeak.
All right, welcome and well met. It's time once again for the Jaunty Mantis, a tabletop role-playing game podcast, if you can believe it. Where curious gamers ask creative questions. And I am one of those gamers. My name is Maddie, and I have with me my co-host, Jesse.
Hello.
And this is season 4. Season 4, which is we decided to open our questions to the audience. And the audience provided. And today
Thank you, almighty audience. We sing your praises. Grace us with your questions and wisdom.
Definitely. And one of those questions that we'll be covering today is what, Jesse?
This is a question from an anonymous user. And they said, in the context of TTRPGs, when is it appropriate to say no?
Yeah. I thought this was a pretty good question. I think it's a pretty good question because recently I actually had to do this. I had to say no. I had to say no to one of my players in the game that you're
villain.
In. Yeah. So I'm very curious to see what is your take on this question. Why would somebody be asking us when is it appropriate to say no? I'm assuming as a GM, when is it appropriate to say no? What do you think?
Well, this is going to be a short episode because the answer is never. It's never appropriate to say no as a GM. How could you take away your player's agency? No, I think it's a great question because it's really hard to answer because it's a very fine line.
Mm-hmm.
You probably want to be a little hesitant about saying no because there's two camps. There's either that overly permissive GM. I think we've talked about it on the podcast. I've been the overly permissive GM, and I've let, a power gamer who is abusive with rules mechanics play a commissar in a Warhammer 40K game. I should have said no. Exactly what I thought would happen happened. But then I'm sure there's also GMs out there who are, you hear the horror stories about are just like, no, you wouldn't do that. No, that's not acceptable. no, my NPC is going to handle this one. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so like
Yeah.
there's a, between those two poles, there's a place to thread, and it's complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, other podcasts like Happy Jacks buttered their bread with the idea of yes-anding as being a big part of role-playing games. And I agree with that for the most part. Yes-anding coming from the world of improv and acting, which is basically whatever is happening in front of you at your table in a role-playing game context. Your thought should, instead of no, should be yes and. Like, how do I take what you're doing and then add on to it or take it somewhere else, but never shut it down, never tell somebody no, essentially. And I think it's appropriate for GMs to say no. I think it's very appropriate, and I think it should be done more often. And, I can think of several instances where I should have said no to things that players wanted to do, but I just went ahead and let them do it anyway because I was like, what's the harm in it? And so I guess that's my question there is there any harm in never saying no? This is starting to come out to be like Depeche Mode lyrics or the Cure lyrics all of a sudden.
This is more Depeche Mode.
Yeah.
Like, if you give me a minute to workshop it, I could come up with what the verse is.
For sure. Yeah.
The appropriacy of never saying no, like the ministry of appropriacy, of the decadency of never saying no. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Depeche Mode song.
There you go.
Synth. You got to rhyme like 3-syllable words to be Depeche Mode. I think the key for me, and I don't know if this answers the question because I got distracted by trying to write Depeche Mode lyrics. But I think the key word there is what's the harm? Mm-hmm. To me, the appropriacy of saying no is when it's going to cause some harm at the table. And harm to what? I mean, at the most ridiculous wave-offish I could be of this question is when it's going to cause harm to the vibe, which is not distinct or clear. But, someone does something really, wants their character to do something really skeezy, and that's not the vibe of the moment and character. I think you can say no. Someone wants to play a character type that doesn't fit the story you're interested in telling. Like, that's going to create future harms to the vibe every session. It's okay to say no.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think?
I agree with that. The session 0, coming up with the group idea, the concept, bringing the group together in session 0, the planning phase, instead of having you all meet at the fucking tavern once again.
Everybody talks about session 0. We talk about session 0 a lot. I want to say too, and I've compared this with, classroom management for teaching on a previous issue of the podcast, saying no effectively in your session 0 is the proactive way to avoid saying no a lot more later.
Mm-hmm.
I really firmly believe that if you can be like, I need you to show up to this one, and I need you to not have an entire character done, and I need to hear pitches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to hear pitches because I might need to say no.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have this kind of story that, and here's a justification for that kind of story I want to tell, because I can hear some people hearing that and be like, oh, well, it's a group storytelling game. And I'm just like, one of those things that I picked up from friend of the show, Chris, who loves the Forgotten Realms, is that you are a player too.
Mm-hmm.
And as the DM or GM or storyteller or keeper or game mother, if you're playing Aliens, which is so great.
Oh, interesting.
One of the things that you need to make sure you're doing is having fun too. And if you have an idea of the kind of story that you want these characters to be in, like, it's okay to guide people to that story. That's not an abuse of power. That's not taking away their agency. It's just giving somebody a form to work with.
Yeah, I agree. I think this speaks to that, the thing that a lot of us did in the early days of our gaming careers, where when we would describe what D&D or any role-playing game was, we would say, you can do anything. And that was a huge mistake. We shouldn't have said you can do anything in a role-playing game, because then you have people who will try to do anything that comes to mind, and then you have to remind them that there's like an action economy and that there's rules for spell casting or whatever the case may be, and you run into that kind of problematic issue. And I think that saying no is an appropriate way to curtail the you can do anything mindset. And I think I think GMs should be saying no more. Does that make any sense?
It does. I see where you're coming from. You know how I get nitpicky over terminology.
Of course, please do.
Like, I think it is okay to not respond 100% affirmatively to PCs all the time. The way we're talking about it, and I feel like I know what you're talking about, but I'm worried that listeners are going to be like, well, he's just going to say no. Like, you're not literally saying, no, you can't all the time.
Correct.
But you're redirecting and rephrasing. And I got to give credit, because I think this is a Critical Role thing. I think this is a Matt Mercerism. But I have this sticker on my desk. I think I've held it up in games, and this is to me a soft no, which is an art form. But this sticker that says, it's probably backwards, you can certainly try. Which, you know, to me, there's some subtext there of like, it is unlikely to go well for you, but, you know, you can certainly try. Do you think, on that note, as an extension, do you think presenting the consequences of failure is saying no?
I think that would be more preferable than saying no. You know, human beings don't like being told no.
Yeah.
And especially when you're playing a game of imagination, I think it can be very disruptive to be told no. So explain to me, because I think it would be better, but how exactly would that work then? Like, how does explaining the consequences, what would that look like? And how would that be a better way of saying no?
Well, it's a thing I did a lot in Trophy. I don't know if you remember me doing it, but it's just like, okay, but if you fail, this will definitely happen. And then who's got a devil's bargain that could make it worse? But that's because that's the structure of Trophy. Like that's that's in there. Like, I think just explaining the consequences when someone does something that's very, very improbable, right? Or they want their character to do something. And this is usually not the kind of abusive behavior that I would say you need, because there are situations that demand a hard no. When someone's like, you know, wants to initiate PvP combat with another player at the table, and you've talked like, we're not doing PvP in this game as a session zero thing. That's a hard no. Someone wants to do something with like sexual assault or something creepy like that. That's a hard no. You know? But yeah, the sort of explaining consequences is, okay, you can do this, but it's going to be really, really difficult. Like in a DC system, it's going to be like in Shadow Dark, I'm like, it would be a DC 15.
Right.
And if you fail, you will take an egregious amount of damage.
Yeah, but don't you think that's going to make them want to do it more?
Yeah, but then you're off the hook for the consequences. So, you know.
Well, why would you be on the hook for the consequences anyway? Like, it's a game. Like, what kind of consequences are you on the hook for?
I mean, if they're just like, if they think it's not fair or arbitrary that they failed their role and then fell out of a tree, like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I would look at it more like, instead of consequences, what's the better way that I want to put this? Instead of explaining the consequences, because it's like, I don't want to motivate disruptive behavior, right? Like I've run games for groups like that. You know what I'm talking about. We talked about, at the time, we talked about it extensively. It's just like and the easy answer here is like, it wasn't a good match. I shouldn't have been playing D&D with this group.
We worked so hard to try and save that group. So many hours of conversation.
Yeah, and the easy answer is like, just don't do the group, right? But like, not everybody has that as an option. You know, we play with friends and family and people we care about, and sometimes feelings get hurt or whatever the case may be, or sometimes people take things too far. And I'm trying to think of the circumstance where it's like, saying no would be like, well, this is not the kind of game that I want to run, like if somebody wants to punch the mayor in the face for no good reason, and you're like trying to tell a story here, like yes, you're a player at the table, but you're the arbiter of the events of the game, and the GM often does the majority of the work, not just in like creating, organizing, and running the game, but also making sure people understand the rules and making everybody feel comfortable and trying to give everybody the spotlight and agency. And yes, you are a player, but at the same time, like, you should have the option to tell people no, like a no, but instead of a yes, and. Like, maybe that's how I want to put it. It's like, maybe it would be better if you say, well, no, if somebody was like, well, I want to do this, this, and this, can I do that? And you can say, well, no, but what you can do is the following thing instead. How about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great solution. I think one of the things, if you don't make saying no part of your game running practice, which we're at the same place, you definitely should.
Yeah.
In the appropriate situations, if you don't make it no, like your punch the mayor in the face example, which again, I also know is a real thing from a real game that happened, is that if you get paralyzed by not wanting to say no, because game of imagination, I don't want to take their agency, blah, 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 you're going to let that happen. And then you're not going to apply the natural consequences in the story, probably, because you don't want to harsh their fun. And then they're just going to sit there getting miserable while this game spirals increasingly away from the story that hopefully you pitched. Like, this is the kind of story I want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we've learned anything in the last decade of gaming and the advent of fiction first story gaming, it's that you don't ever have to be in that situation. You can just raise stakes or no, but to go back to that point earlier about what are the consequences, we had a situation in my Shadow Dark game, which again, high lethality. Everybody knows death is on the table. That's a session 0 thing. It's a thing people joke morbidly about and fun, and I really hope IT doesn't spend a lot of time reading our Teams chat because I worry about my job. But there was a character, was a random encounter, 2 10-foot tall shark-headed demons with battle axes that can just shatter organic things. They're in the book. It was a random encounter. They decided to fight because that was a session where there were 12 people there, so they were a war band rather than an adventuring party. We're gonna fight them. So one guy has rolled really lucky. He's got this cool demon lotus tea drinking assassin who has these shadow teleportation powers. It's a cool character class. And he's like, I want to teleport to the tree above the demons. And I say, okay. He does. He throws a throwing knife at the demon. It hits it for an insignificant amount of damage. The next turn of the demon, it turns and uses its shatter thing to just make the entire tree this guy is up a branch in shatter, and he falls, and he's a 2nd level character. So he falls 30 feet, he takes 3d6 damage, and he's dead.
Mm-hmm.
And he was really bummed and disappointed. And I think if I said, you've seen these things shatter material so far in this fight, just so you know, if you teleport to that tree right next to him, the height is not necessarily going to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
If I had said that and laid out those consequences, he would probably still have done it, but I don't think he would have been as bummed. And he wasn't upset. Player's a great guy. He still plays. I'm lucky to have him in the game, but I think I could have avoided some of that feeling of oh man,
yeah,
I had done that. Well,
yeah, but
that's the kind of consequences I get off the hook.
I think it's still a really good example, even though we both, I don't know this person, but I can tell this did not ruin everything for this player.
Yeah.
And you're not trying to make it out, but I think it's still a really good example because there are players like that where they didn't get their way or something didn't happen or their character died and then they're a pill, like they're difficult to deal with after that. We've all been around that person. So even though this person is not that person, like I still think it's a really good example. But my issue with what you said is that like I can't think that far ahead for 5 people, let alone how many are in your Shadow Dark game? Like 12 to 15. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm just trying to keep up with what everybody's doing and, plan things out in my brain as best I can. I'm never going to it's not going to occur to me that that's going to happen.
See, my default in Shadow Dark, because it's theater of the mind, we don't have a tack map or a grid or anything. My default to try and encourage my players to do this behavior and do things like the teleporting up into the tree is like the whole time I'm waiting for the people to take their turns to go around. I'm thinking if it gets to my monster's turn, which it sometimes does not ever because warband, what is the most interesting thing I can do with this monster?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just swing the axe, roll the hit for this many damage. It's blow up the tree the guy's hiding in, or, terrify people so they're frozen and then like teleport in front of it and just look at it with its blank face for a second and then teleport away and get somebody else. Like, because that's to make the fight interesting for me. That's what I'm trying to do rather than just like, it's my turn. I have 3 goblins left. I roll 3 times. It's this. Sometimes I fall into that. But to me, that's where I can get some teeth in.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that means I do need to set up consequences. Because, like, what is it? The whole thing in Plan G about kinetic combat? Like, if they're fighting an ogre, the ogre should be throwing people into shit.
Right. Yeah. And that is not always easy to remember to do.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many different things for us as game mothers to remember. That like when that ogre is up, you're just like, okay, well, I'm looking at its stuff. Okay, I roll, it hit or it didn't or whatever. Okay, we're on to the next person and we're going. You know what I mean? It like that's why it's great that Pangea like states that because it reminds you to make encounters as interesting as you possibly can. That like I have begun designing encounters where if I have a cool thing that the monster is supposed to do, I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that happens in the first round.
Yep.
Because they may not get the opportunity to do it otherwise. Like it's just how it goes.
If you fight an ogre, it's going to throw you into a wall. If you're fighting a horrible amalgam of 4 spiders all fused back to back to back so the 32 legs stick out, it's going to roll across a room whose entire floor is a web with little statuary things in it to jump from. That's the name of the game.
Yeah.
And that was a situation where as a player, I really wished I could have said no. And I think I may have said, nope.
Yeah.
Had a no in my head moment in last night's game when the tiny frog hands grabbed the oar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that encounter did not go the way that I wanted it to, but I think that's another episode or banter topic. But the encounter with the spiders that you're bringing up from one of my games, that's exactly what I had happen in that first round because I was like, this may be the only opportunity I get to do this.
Was there? Well, let's put the practical in. With the encounter you saw last night, you said didn't go the way you wanted it to. Was there a no in there that would have? And then follow-up question, is it important as the GM to have the encounter go the way you wanted to?
So I'm going to answer the last question first, which is it's not important. Like, okay. We get precious about our encounters because it takes us time to think of them and come up with them. And, if you're using the timer threat and treats, from that I've been a huge fan of and been using in every encounter, it is kind of a bummer if things don't go the way that they were supposed to. So, but it ultimately doesn't matter, I just wanted that encounter to go on for longer and not have the treat solve the problem so effectively.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the part that I should have said no to in that encounter should have been to myself. Because, and okay, so I'll explain the encounter in order to like flesh out this problem, because I should have said no to me. So the encounter is that the party is going down the river. There's an unusually strong current that is propelling them forward. They barely need to paddle. They're in two separate boats because they've captured a suspect in the story and they've bound him up. Okay? Party didn't describe how they bound him up. They bound him up. So they had to go in two separate boats. The first boat runs into a giant amalgamation of frogs. So picture hundreds of frogs who have been forcibly and magically mutated into what is essentially a gigantic wacky wall walker. You know, I don't know, if you were a kid of the 80s or the 90s, there were these like sticky ball things that you would get and they would be immediately useless after you like threw them twice.
And they'd fuck up the paint.
Yeah. And you could throw them at the wall and they usually had like feet or appendages on them to like sell the theme. And they were so sticky that they would slowly roll walk down surfaces.
Imagine that, but with like millions of or thousands of tiny frog limbs.
Yes. And so the frog creatures coming out and trying to destroy the first boat in this encounter. And I set up the timer, the threat, the treat, but I don't tell them what the treat is as clearly as I've mentioned it in past encounters. What I wanted to do, because when I rolled initiative for the monsters and the captive is the second to last person to go in the initiative order. And what I wanted to do was have the captive stand up during the fight and try to jump overboard. And the only other person to go is last in the initiative order. And I second guessed the encounter and was like, I should give this person the opportunity in like an attack of opportunity, but I basically let him do a full move. And then I felt bad for removing the NPC from the equation because we had never detailed how exactly he was tied up, you know, and I didn't want to yuck the yum of the players because they had gone through so much effort to grab him, to get him in the first place. So I'm like, well, that'd be really shitty if he managed to like jump overboard and get away from them. So
yeah, I thought that he was going for. I now realize the moment in your head where you switched because I thought that's what was going to happen.
Yeah. And so I kind of like, I should have said no to that impulse of like, it's not exactly pulling a punch, you know, but the part of me that was like, no, keep him in the boat. Instead, what he did was he stood up and then tried to like bull rush one of the other, Jesse's character into the drink, which didn't work and it wouldn't have worked.
No, I have a +5 on dex saves.
Yeah. But like, you know, like that's how it went down. I basically pulled a punch on a decision. I don't have another word for it, but I second guessed a decision. I should have told myself no. I should have been like, no, this is an opportunity for him to get away. It doesn't mean he's going to. You know, he could jump in the water and start drowning because he's tied up, and then they could just fish him out. And that might have been for a better encounter.
Yeah, we would have then had 2 timers going. Like the current's going to carry him farther away than we can reach.
Or he's going
to have to go after him. That would have been more interesting.
Yeah, and I didn't do it because I thought I was shortchanging the party, which is the term I'm looking for, because they went to so much effort to get him. We did go through a lot to get that fucker.
No, but I think it's a really great instinct to like not want to shortchange the PCs, to not like take the toys that they've worked so hard to get away from them. And I can't fault you for that. I don't know if you're interested in this. Would you want to know how I would have ruled that one?
Yeah.
If I were running the game?
Yeah, for sure.
I would have given Meta advantage on trying to stop him.
Okay.
Because he's bound.
And
you gave disadvantage. And then having the advantage, if the roll fails, you get a pass, basically. Because you're like, I said yes. Wink, wink.
Yeah, I mean, I gave Meta disadvantage because he was acting outside of his turn, essentially.
Yeah. I would
But
have
you're
given
right.
an advantage on the reaction to use an attack, to make an opportunity attack on a bound guy to, use the grab action, which is an unarmed strike thing that I just realized now in 2024 is clearly written as the 3 options for an unarmed attack: deal damage, grapple, or shove. Here's how all of them work. And I'm like, man, that's well laid out.
Yeah.
Grapple is 2 sentences.
That's insane.
It's so insane. It's like, it's like Wizards said no to themselves about like
Yeah, speaking of,
flowchart grapples.
yeah. Do you remember how it's been in past incarnations of D&D? Where it's like,
Oh yeah.
if your opponent is bigger than you and they have the upper hand and it's the second Tuesday of the month and one of you has brown hair,
That would have been on my no list in 3.5 for DMing if I had a no list back then. Someone shows up and says, I want to play a Kinder. No. Someone shows up and says, I want to play a Grappler. No.
Yeah, I don't want to do this every time.
I don't want to look at the flowchart because it was an honest to God flowchart.
There were so many different modifiers that you would insert or whatever. But the other instance of saying no was with John and his character, because he is he's a fighter and his subclass is Eldritch Knight, and he wanted a way for his character to kind of come into magic. And so what he asked for was, we have another character in the group, Aaron's character, who is a wizard, and there is the series of clues that Aaron's character, the wizard, his mentor, has been leaving him clues or left things that are associated with him, right? Which is stuff for that character's backstory that I have specifically seeded into the adventure. And what John wanted was, he was like, can I tie this into my character having seen his characters interact with these things from his mentor? And I was like, no, you can't. We're not going to do that, because that is Aaron's character's backstory, and I'm saving that spotlight for him. Like, I don't want further progress for that character's backstory that doesn't involve that character. And I was like, instead, why don't we focus on something for your character that would make this moment of leveling up more relevant, more thematically relevant for you? Maybe there's something in their past which would have caused them to be exposed to magic, and it's latent or it's just coming out now, or whatever the case may be. But that is the instance of me telling one of my players, no, we're not going to do that. Like, yeah. So what do you think about that?
No, I think boiling it down, your instinct to protect spotlight for a character who's worked really hard on that story, I think that's good. I also think, knowing very well the person you said no to, there's like not a safer person in the world to be like, can we not do that? And for them to be like, oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I do want to add, this comes with a lot of trust that I have with my friends when we play D&D together that has been earned. Like, I can say no, and I know that that person's not going to take it.
Yeah, I think if either of us ever did like con games or stranger games like online, I think we would have a little bit more to say about like saying no to strangers, but that's not a experience that I have a ton of.
Right.
Yeah, I think if we had to start mapping it out, like what are the primary reasons to say no, to prevent someone from causing harm to the vibe.
Right.
Like, if someone's doing things that are really going off in a different direction of the story. And I think, to just clarify what I'm saying about that one, I mean like the story you talked to everybody about in session 0 and they got on board with.
Right.
I just don't, like, if they're like, you're ruining my scene, like, I don't think that's probably a good reason to say no. But if someone's like having their character do like a surprise heel turn, might need to pause the game and take them aside for a conversation and be like, that's not exactly what we talked about.
I have said no around alignment in the past, and I don't want to retread our alignment episode just yet. I think we could in the future, but that is one of my favorite things about the modern incarnation of D&D is that alignment matters even less than it did. Like it barely matters, if anything, but in previous versions of the game, it was a huge component of how we played. And I ended up saying no to a lot of people because I was like, well, maybe that was more of a consequence situation where I'm like, this is not, it says on your character sheet, you are lawful good. If you are going to stab this guy in the back, that means you are not lawful good. Like, that is not how I envision lawful good as an alignment. And then the person would sit there and try to justify it to me. And I was like, I think we don't agree on what lawful good means, So I have had that experience in the past of saying no over those kind of conflicts where it's like the player wants to do something that takes advantage of the situation. And I'm like, no, unless there's an alignment change, and for some reason that person is insisting they can still remain lawful good, probably because there's a paladin in the group, and back in the day, paladins, when they sensed you were evil, then that gave them a license to do insane shit. Don't get me started on that.
Well, they thought it gave them a license to do insane shit.
Well, they certainly played that way,
Yeah.
You like, if you were a paladin
that would be the one to say no to.
Yes,
that's the paladin who's like, well, I'm going to kill you because you're evil. And
because I just sensed you're evil. Yeah.
That's okay. When you have no trial and you haven't seen the person commit a crime, that's murder, and you're lawful good. So, yeah, I'm glad alignment's not a straitjacket. I will say one event that happened in the game that I'm wondering if like maybe I should have said no to myself was like when I hit Baz with the club after he was bound. Because I'm like I'm double checking my alignment to be like,
yeah,
is this the thing I committed to? And I think I'm okay. I think I'm fine with it. Like, I'm chaotic good. This guy is a child kidnapper, and I'm mad at him. So
and he's admitted it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for context for the listeners, in my 1-20 game in which Jesse plays in, the guy that they've apprehended, they roughed him up a bit. They tied him up and then roughed him up a bit when he didn't give them the information that they were looking for.
I just got mad at him, hit him with a face. It wasn't like, I'm going to keep doing this unless you tell me. That was Galen, who I tossed him to explicitly for that purpose, because I'm like, hey, my hands are clean.
Yeah, and I think this is another note. This is fun. This is like a walk down memory lane for me here. Like, this is another situation.
That was a good no.
Is like, I've run games in the past where the players have downright tortured NPCs on the justification that they're evil and they want information, and I have said no to that in the past. Like, I've been like, this is not something I want to explore, guys. Like, I think what the compromise was is I could be like, look, we can all agree that you guys caused this person pain. You beat them up or whatever. But it was like, and this is multiple groups of people that wanted to do this kind of stuff. It was like, and we're talking about like chopping fingers off and stuff to get somebody to talk, and I'm like, this is not what I signed up for. I do not want to role play. There are certain things I don't want to role play. I don't want to role play NPCs and PCs hitting on each other, not because I'm not sexually comfortable with who I am. It's because I don't want to do that with my friends and or family. Like,
yeah, me too. Also, and I have no game. So.
Yeah. And another one is, I don't want to role play torture. Just not into it.
What? That's not fun for you?
No. No, it's not. I don't enjoy the idea of player characters causing harm to evil NPCs in order to get the information, or even not even evil NPCs if I'm remembering situations correctly in the past. So those are situations I've said no to.
Yeah.
So how for our listener, how would we guide them? Like, if it sounds like let your conscience be your guide on when it's okay to say no. And we've painted several scenarios in which you would say no or could say no. And how do we empower someone to say no? Like, under what circumstances is it okay for them to not remove agency, but also stand fast for the things they do or do not want to allow in their game?
Oh, I think this brushes dangerously close to an attitude I don't have, but I'm worried people will interpret it this way, but I'm just going to try and pitch it. I don't think you get carte blanche to do whatever for the sake of your story as a game mother.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you say, hey, guy, in the session 0, hey, guys, hey, ladies, hey, gang, hey, everybody, this is the kind of story I want to tell. It's got these themes. I'd like your characters to be members of this or this organization. And we're going to tell a story kind of about this. Like, I think there's no harm, no foul with that. Like, sketching out the framework of the story you're interested in running. Cool, do that. If you don't do that, I think your like right or privilege to say no is degraded.
Okay. And how were you afraid this was going to be received then?
What do you mean?
Like, you preface this by saying you didn't want to come off a certain way.
I don't want to come off as people like saying like, I'm the DM, so I'm telling my story and you have to go along with it. I think having that discussion in session 0 makes it really clear that you're on board for this, but you have some preferences as a person who's doing a bigger lift than everybody, to be honest. I think if you don't have that conversation, then you come off as it's my story. How dare you ruin it?
Right. So maybe the best way to go about this is to say it is appropriate to say no sometimes, but seek compromise first.
Yes.
Let your players know that like you are not an unreasonable asshole.
Yes.
Like, if that's where the yes and the no but come in, right? Like, seek compromise first. I kind of wish this person had given us an example. So, listener, write back in and if you can, give us a specific example, because I feel like we're bouncing back between two ends of this spectrum, which is like, in one case, you've got a destructive player who's harshing the vibe or running roughshod over the rest of the group, and then you got to step in and say no. And then on the other side, it's more of a compromise. It's more of like, well, that's not really the game that I'm playing. I'd like to run. What, walk me through what you want to do, and let's find a way to make it happen. Let's find a way to make a compromise at the very least.
Yeah.
Cool.
Compromise generally tends to leave everybody feeling a little bit better than just shutting somebody down. But again, and I think I don't need to go through the list again. I think we made the case. There are moments where you need to shut like something happening down. And like, I think basically everybody at the table, if you're feeling weird in your guts because of what's happening in the game, then you get to say no.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Yeah, let your conscience be your guide. If this is something that feels really wrong to you, say no.
Yeah.
If it's something where you're like, well, I may not be in the right on this, or there may be a conditional part of it, I don't want to step on too many people's feet or give all, I don't want people to take things the wrong way, then seek compromise.
Well, do we have a lightning round of just pitches you'd say no to?
I feel like we kind of already did that with my torture, alignment,
No, but we can get silly with it. Like if you ever run your Numenera Cozy Fantasy or your Cypher System Cozy Fantasy game,
yeah,
I want to play a vampire.
Okay, I'm interested. Why would I say no to this?
Well, since you said yes, now I have to think about that. I was just thinking what's something very antithetical to Cozy Fantasy, and I'm thinking maybe the Dracula, as in the Dracula the musical from Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Is I believe
okay,
that movie?
Yeah, for sure.
That is a character.
Why would I say no to this?
Well, okay, so there's a yes. Yeah.
Bad example.
Yes, and do it soon.
Okay. What else do you have?
I want to be Batman.
Okay.
I can be Batman?
If you really want. Which game are we playing?
The one where I'm Batman.
Okay. Yeah.
It's going to be cool.
What superhero rule system do you want to use to be Batman? And can other people also be Batman? And here's a pitch. Superhero game, everybody's Batman.
Superhero game based on multiplicity, everybody's Batman.
Yeah. That reminds me of this. Now, keep in mind, we were really drunk at the time, but my brother and I came up with this movie idea that starred Mark Wahlberg and John Cena, right? That was that was the pitch, right? Like, that's how, like, picture this.
I'm already a yes.
This movie stars Mark Wahlberg and John Cena, right? And they are both been assigned the same undercover role accidentally. So they're both playing the same undercover role from two separate police precincts. And they've been doing it for a couple of years. And all the like mafia and all the other people have experienced both of them doing this. And they are just meeting each other for the first time because both of their partners have been killed.
By Jason Statham.
Of course. So I would run that game where everybody thinks they're the only lone vigilante in the city. And they're all like, everybody's dressed almost identically to each other because they all have the same idea. Like, you're all Batman. And like, the city is really well under control because everybody thinks it's one person, but there's 6 of you.
Gee, that's a yes.
Yeah. And it's cozy fantasy.
Yeah, that was a bad idea for lightning round because we just really like each other's ideas. That's why we have a podcast where we talk about them.
Yeah. I can't say no to you.
Oh, back at ya.
But listener, I could say no to you, but I choose not to. And instead I'm going to say yes.
Well, no, but then this is a question. Is keep it brief saying no?
Exactly. Well, we got there eventually, dear listener, and thank you for taking this journey with us on the Jaunty Mantis. You can reach out to us with your follow-ups or your questions or your comments about this episode or really any other episode at jauntymantis@gmail.com. Jesse, how should people get in touch with us otherwise if they don't want to send us an email?
You can reach out to us at the Jaunty Mantis on X. And we are Jaunty Mantis on Threads.
That's right.
And my personal X is Jingoist Fett.
Yeah.
And yeah.
For sure.
Drop a line. Say hi.
Yeah, and until next time, listener, I can never say no to anyone but you.
So get out there and say no to somebody or some fucking shit.